This story contains disturbing details and may not be suitable for younger viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The Second World War was one of humanity's darkest chapters. Millions perished, nations burned, and soldiers marched into battles far from their homelands. But not all of them fell to bullets, bombs, or disease. Some were claimed by something far older. In the suffocating jungles of Southeast Asia, where the air itself felt heavy with decay and secrets, Japanese soldiers pushed deeper into enemy territory. Their mission was clear: secure the supply routes, cut off resistance, and dominate the thick forests that swallowed entire divisions whole. But soon, whispers began to travel among the ranks. Whispers of something else in the jungle, something not human, something that watched, followed, and hunted. At first, no one wanted to admit it. The jungle already had a way of driving men to madness. At night, the cries of unseen animals echoed through the canopy. Insects whined, frogs croaked, and shadows stretched endlessly under the pale glow of the moon. But there was a difference here: the silence. Men said that sometimes the forest stopped breathing. No birds, no insects, no wind, just stillness. And in that silence, they felt it, eyes watching from the trees, from just beyond the light of their campfires. One young soldier, barely 18, confided to his sergeant that he had seen something, a figure. Not a man, not an animal, something in between. It crouched in the tree line, taller than any human, its body covered in tangled hair, its face hidden in shadow. By the time he pointed his rifle, it was gone, vanishing into the jungle without a sound. The sergeant told him to forget it. The jungle plays tricks, he said, but the boy swore it was real. Then came the first disappearance. A patrol of 5 men was sent to scout a river crossing. They never returned. At first, officers blamed ambushes. Perhaps the enemy had taken them. But when another search party found what was left, doubts began to spread. The bodies had not been shot. They had not been stabbed. They had been torn apart. One soldier's torso was discovered high in the branches of a tree, as if something had dragged him upward. Another had bite marks so deep they nearly split bone. Whatever killed them had done so with raw strength, brutal, animalistic, unrelenting. From that day on, fear spread like wildfire through the camp. Soldiers refused to go into the jungle alone. Campfires were built larger, rifles were kept loaded at all times. Men began tying charms and talismans to their belts, whispering prayers in the dark. But even these desperate measures weren't enough to keep the terror away. At night, strange sounds echoed from the tree line. Not the howl of a wolf, not the roar of a tiger, something deeper. A guttural growl followed by a screech so piercing it sent shivers down the spines of hardened veterans. Some soldiers claimed they saw glowing red eyes in the dark, hovering just above the height of a man. And then, the food began to vanish. Rations went missing from secured storage crates. Freshly killed game was stolen before it could even be cooked. Soldiers set traps, thinking local villagers or animals were sneaking into camp. But the traps were sprung and destroyed, leaving behind only claw marks, long, jagged, and inhuman. That's when the men realized they weren't fighting an enemy soldier. They weren't fighting hunger or disease. They were being stalked. Stalked by something that belonged to the jungle itself. Something that saw them not as conquerors, but as prey. The jungle was no longer just a battlefield. It had become a hunting ground. And the soldiers were not the hunters. They were the hunted. Every morning, roll calls grew smaller. Men disappeared without a trace, sometimes in pairs, sometimes alone. One night, a sentry station near the camp perimeter was found at dawn, his rifle still in his hands. His throat was crushed, not by a blade, not by a bullet, but by something so powerful it had caved his windpipe with one strike. His eyes were wide open, frozen in pure terror. The commanders tried to keep discipline, but fear was spreading faster than disease. Soldiers began whispering a name they had learned from the local villagers. The villagers rarely spoke about it, but when pressed, their faces grew pale. They called it the Aswang of the jungle, a shape-shifting predator, half beast, half spirit, that fed on human flesh. To the villagers, it was a curse, a nightmare that lingered in the shadows. To the soldiers, it suddenly felt all too real. Some refused to believe the myths, clinging to reason. "It's just a tiger," one lieutenant argued. "The jungle has plenty of them." But the men who had seen the bodies knew better. No tiger could snap a man's spine clean in two. No tiger could rip a grown soldier from his tent without leaving a sound. No tiger could move like a shadow, appearing and vanishing without a trace. And then came the footprints. One morning, after a particularly dreadful night of screams in the distance, scouts discovered massive impressions in the mud circling their camp. Each print was nearly twice the size of a man's boot, with claw marks that dug deep into the earth. The strangest part, they walked in a perfect circle, surrounding the entire camp. Whatever it was, it had been watching them, testing their defenses, waiting. The soldiers tried to convince themselves it was just their imagination, but the attacks grew bolder. A supply cart filled with ammunition was overturned in the middle of the night, its driver missing, his seat splattered with blood. Another time, 2 guards on patrol vanished between checkpoints. All that remained of them was a shredded uniform tangled in the vines, dripping with fresh blood. The jungle seemed to be closing in on them. Every shadow hid a pair of eyes. Every rustling leaf carried the threat of death. Men started refusing to go on patrol, faking illnesses, begging their officers not to send them out, and those who were forced often never returned. Sleep became impossible. The soldiers huddled together around fires, rifles in trembling hands, listening to the forest breathe. Sometimes, they swore they heard laughter, low, guttural, inhuman laughter, echoing from the trees. The officers tried to suppress panic by declaring stricter routines, bigger patrols, heavier firepower. But no matter how many bullets they carried, no matter how many men they sent out together, the result was the same: silence. Then screams, then nothing. One night, a survivor staggered back into camp. His uniform was shredded, his body torn and bleeding. He collapsed into the dirt, gasping for air. When the medics rushed to help him, his last words sent a chill through every man present. "It's Set's not an animal." He died before he could say more. From that moment on, the soldiers realized the truth. They weren't fighting an enemy they could outshoot or outlast. They were facing something beyond the laws of war, beyond the understanding of men, something older than the jungle itself. And it wasn't Set going to stop. It wanted them all. The night after the wounded soldier died, the camp fell into a silence heavier than the humid air pressing down on them. No one spoke of what he had said, but everyone thought the same thing. They weren't fighting a beast, they were fighting something else, something with a mind. At dusk, the jungle came alive. The insects sang their endless song, the air buzzed with unseen wings, and the towering canopy swallowed the last of the sunlight. The officers ordered a patrol, 5 men armed with rifles, bayonets fixed, and a machine gun between them. They were told to search the perimeter, to make sure no one or nothing was circling their camp again. The 5 soldiers vanished into the trees. Minutes stretched into hours. The men in camp strained their ears for the signal shots they'd been told to fire if they encountered anything. But the forest stayed eerily quiet, too quiet. Then the sound came. Not gunfire, not shouting. A scream. High-pitched, filled with terror, and cut off so suddenly it echoed into silence. The camp erupted into chaos. Every man grabbed his weapon. Searchlights were cranked on, slicing through the wall of trees, and there in the glow of one beam, they saw something move. Not a man, something massive. It darted between the trunks, fast, impossibly fast, but long enough for them to glimpse it, a dark figure, hunched and powerful, with limbs too long for any human and glowing eyes that reflected the light like burning coals. The men fired. Dozens of rounds tore into the jungle, ripping apart leaves and branches. The night exploded with the thunder of gunfire, but when the smoke cleared, there was nothing. No body, no blood, nothing but the echoes of their own fear. When dawn broke, they found what was left of the patrol. The machine gunner was sprawled against a tree, his chest crushed inward as though something had slammed into him with inhuman force. Another was found hanging from the branches, gutted, his lifeless body swaying in the morning breeze like a grotesque warning. The others were simply gone, vanished without a trace. The survivors refused to leave camp after that. They built makeshift barricades, sharpened wooden stakes, anything to keep the monster out. But the fear inside the camp grew worse than the threat outside. Soldiers stopped sleeping. Some began hallucinating, claiming to see glowing eyes watching them from the tree line. Even in broad daylight, one officer, desperate to keep control, organized another hunting party. This time they carried flamethrowers. "We still burn it out," he barked. "No creature can survive fire." They set out, a group of 10, their faces pale but determined. For hours they searched, torching patches of jungle, filling the air with the stench of charred wood and smoke. And then it struck. From the trees above, it dropped like a shadow given flesh. The men barely had time to scream before it tore into them. One was ripped apart in seconds, his limbs flung into the undergrowth. Another's throat was ripped out as he tried to aim his rifle. The flamethrower roared to life, a stream of fire lighting up the jungle. But the creature was already gone, a blur melting back into the darkness. Only 3 of the 10 made it back to camp. They were shaking, incoherent, their uniforms soaked in blood that wasn't their own. "It can think." One of them whispered through cracked lips. "It knew where we sit, it waited. It sits, playing with us." That night, no one slept. Fires blazed around the camp, rifles clutched in trembling hands, but every man knew the truth. They weren't hunters. They were prey, and whatever stalked them wasn't done yet. By the 4th night, the men were more afraid of each other than the beast outside the camp. The soldiers barely spoke anymore, their words replaced by glares, suspicion, and the rattling of rifles in nervous hands. They had all seen what the thing could do, how it could tear apart men like paper, how it could vanish into the jungle as if the trees themselves were swallowing it. Now every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind, every flicker of firelight made their nerves snap tighter. One soldier, a skinny kid from Osaka, refused to eat. He swore the meat from their rations was tainted, that the beast had poisoned it somehow. Another claimed the glowing eyes weren't real at all, that the officers were using fear to control them. The tension cracked the camp open like a rotten log. Then came the mutiny. It started with whispers, soldiers quietly arguing that the officers had led them into a death trap, that they needed to abandon the mission and flee back toward the coast. But whispers turned into shouts. Shouts turned into weapons drawn. In the glow of the fire, rifles were raised. Japanese soldier against Japanese soldier. The officer in charge stepped forward, his voice iron even as his hands trembled. "You break ranks now," he barked, "and the beast will pick you off one by one. Discipline is the only thing that can save us." But the men didn't believe him. One soldier lunged, striking the officer across the face with the butt of his rifle. Another shoved the flames higher, feeding branches into the fire, as though the light alone could protect him. Someone screamed that the beast was watching, pointing toward the tree line, yet when the men turned, nothing was there. In that moment of distraction, the jungle itself seemed to move. A branch snapped, leaves rustled, and then chaos. The beast struck the edge of the camp, not attacking directly, but circling, testing, taunting. Its guttural growl rolled through the clearing, low and deep like thunder underground. Every soldier spun toward the sound, firing blindly into the dark. Gunfire roared, flames blazed, and the night became a battlefield. But the more they fired, the clearer it became. There was nothing to shoot at. The creature was moving around them, too fast, too clever. And then, it grabbed one of them. A soldier standing too close to the edge of the light vanished mid-scream, dragged into the shadows. The men fired after him, but all they heard was the wet tearing of flesh, then silence. The mutiny ended in an instant. Whatever anger they felt toward each other dissolved, replaced by sheer terror. They stumbled back toward the center of camp, forming a trembling circle around the fire, weapons shaking in their hands. Some cried, others muttered prayers. But the damage was done. Trust was gone. The officer tried to speak again, but this time, no one listened. His words were drowned out by the sound of the jungle, chirping, buzzing, alive, and by the fear that every shadow held a set of glowing eyes. By dawn, 2 more men were missing. Their rifles lay abandoned near the barricade. The ground around them streaked with drag marks that disappeared into the undergrowth. No one had heard a thing. That morning, the officer gathered what was left of the unit. His voice cracked as he addressed them, but he forced steel into his tone. "This thing is hunting us," he said. "It is not an animal, it is not a man. But it bleeds, and if it bleeds, we can kill it." The men wanted to believe him. They wanted to believe anything that gave them a sliver of hope, but the truth was written on their pale faces, in their hollow eyes. They had fired hundreds of rounds into the trees. They had burned acres of jungle. They had seen the beast take men as if they were nothing. And still, it was out there, waiting. That night, when the fire burned low and the soldiers huddled in silence, one of them whispered the thought that had been eating away at all of them. "What if it doesn't set bleed?" The others didn't set answer, because deep down, they were starting to believe it. By the fifth night, the jungle no longer felt like a place. It felt like a mouth, a vast, living thing that swallowed every sound, every prayer, every life the soldiers tried to cling to. The unit was half its size now, once a proud column of men, now reduced to a cluster of hollow-eyed survivors, their uniforms in tatters, their boots caked with mud and blood. Sleep was impossible, food was gone, and the beast, whatever it was, had become bolder. It no longer struck only from the shadows, it taunted them. Branches snapped just outside the glow of the fire. Stones rolled into the clearing as if tossed by invisible hands. Once in the gray haze of dawn, the men awoke to find claw marks gouged into the very trees they leaned against. Fresh and dripping, the marks were higher than any man could reach, higher even than a standing bear. The soldiers could not run. They knew the jungle was too thick, and the thing moved faster than they ever could. They could not wait. It picked them off, one by one, like a hunter playing with prey. So they made a decision. "We fight," the officer said, his voice hoarse but resolute, not as prey, as soldiers. "We will trap it. We will burn it. We will prove that even demons bleed." For the first time in days, a flicker of hope stirred among the men. They built the trap in silence, every movement quick and frantic. Tripwires were strung between trees, pits were dug, lined with sharpened stakes. Barrels of fuel, scavenged from their dwindling supplies, were set as makeshift bombs. And at the center of the clearing, they left a prize, a pack of rations, torn open and bloody, bait meant to lure the beast into the open. By nightfall, the soldiers were ready. They sat in a circle, rifles steady, every eye fixed on the bait. The fire burned low, controlled, enough to light the clearing, but not so much as to scare the creature away. The jungle buzzed with insects, shrieked with distant cries of monkeys and birds, but underneath it all was silence. Heavy, waiting. Then it came. At first, it was only a shape at the edge of the firelight, a shadow too tall, too broad, moving on all fours yet rising at times to full height. Its eyes glowed faintly, not with reflection but with a light of their own, like embers smoldering in the sockets of a skull. The soldiers froze. The beast moved closer, slow, deliberate, sniffing the air. Its breath was a low rumble, a growl that seemed to vibrate in their bones. When it stepped into the clearing, the firelight revealed enough to freeze every man in terror. Its skin, or what passed for skin, was stretched thin, dark, and leathery, pulled tight over a hulking frame. Its arms were too long, its claws curved like knives. Its mouth opened slowly, revealing rows of jagged teeth slick with blood. The bait was working. It stepped closer to the rations. Its head lowering, the soldiers tensed, hands clenching their rifles. The officer raised his hand, signaling, "Wait." The beast reached the bait, sniffed. Then, without warning, it snapped its head up and roared. A sound not meant for the human ear. A sound that shattered courage, broke discipline, and tore through the clearing like a physical force. The trap was sprung. Flames erupted as a soldier lit the fuel barrels, the fire roaring outward in a ring. Tripwires snapped, triggering explosions that shook the ground. The jungle lit up in a wall of fire, surrounding the beast in a blaze. The soldiers opened fire. Bullets ripped through the clearing, smoke filled the air, and the men screamed as they poured everything they had into the inferno. The beast staggered, struck, its body twisting unnaturally as rounds slammed into its chest and shoulders. It let out another roar, this one higher, sharper, like metal tearing. It stumbled into a pit, spears driving deep into its flesh. The men cheered. For the first time it looked vulnerable. But then silence. The smoke parted. The pit was empty. The stakes had been torn apart as if they were twigs. Blood dripped down their edges, thick and black. But the beast was gone. The officer screamed for the men to hold the line, to stay sharp, but panic broke them. Some fired wildly into the trees. Others dropped their rifles and ran into the jungle, desperate to escape the circle of fire. Their screams followed soon after. The beast came back with fury. It burst from the trees, faster than any of them could react. One swipe of its claw sent a soldier flying, his body crashing lifeless into the flames. Another was lifted into the air, torn apart in seconds. The traps meant nothing. The fire meant nothing. The men realized the truth too late. It wasn't just hunting them. It was toying with them, testing them, learning them. And now it was done playing. By the time the chaos ended, the clearing was a massacre. Bodies lay strewn across the ground. Weapons burned in the fire. The few survivors huddled together, their minds shattered, their eyes empty. The officer, bleeding and broken, whispered the words none of them wanted to hear. "We cannot kill it." The beast, standing just beyond the fire, watched them with glowing eyes. Then, as if mocking them, it melted back into the jungle, leaving the survivors in silence. But silence was worse, because silence meant it would come again. The jungle had always been suffocating, dense, wet, alive with unseen eyes. But after the failed trap, it became something worse. It became a tomb. The surviving soldiers moved in silence, their footsteps sluggish, their bodies trembling from exhaustion. Their faces were gaunt, eyes sunken with sleepless terror. They no longer spoke of victory or even survival. Their conversations had dwindled to whispers, fragmented prayers, and the occasional mutter of a man already lost to madness. What was left of their rations had been abandoned in the chaos. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, thirst cracked their lips. They drank from stagnant pools, too desperate to care about the stench. Each mouthful tasted of rot. Each swallow felt like swallowing sickness. But worse than hunger, worse than thirst, was the waiting. The beast no longer attacked with the same relentless fury. It stalked them. Always close, always near, but never striking immediately. Every time they thought they had a moment of peace, a branch would snap, a guttural growl would echo through the trees, or glowing eyes would appear for a split second between the leaves before vanishing. It was as if the jungle itself had become its accomplice. At night, no one dared sleep. The fire barely burned, reduced to embers because fuel was scarce. The darkness pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Every rustle, every chirp of insects, every distant call of an animal set their nerves on edge. They sat huddled, rifles shaking in their hands, eyes darting wildly into the shadows. One soldier broke down completely. His name was Nakamura. In the middle of the night, he began muttering, rocking back and forth, clutching his rifle like a child clutches a toy. "It wants us," he whispered. "It seeps in our blood. It smells us. It will not stop. We are already dead." The officer tried to silence him, but Nakamura suddenly screamed, leapt to his feet, and fired blindly into the jungle. Muzzle flashes tore the darkness apart, the thunder of shots echoing into the trees. Birds erupted into the sky. The other men shouted, some diving to the ground in panic. When the gunfire stopped, the jungle was silent, too silent. A moment later, something answered. Not with a roar, not with a growl, but with a low, guttural sound that was almost laughter. The soldiers froze. Nakamura dropped his rifle. His eyes widened. His lips trembled. Then, before anyone could stop him, he bolted into the trees, vanishing into the darkness. His screams lasted less than a minute before they were cut off. The men sat in silence, shaking, unable to look at one another. None dared to retrieve what was left of him. By morning, they moved again, stumbling through the dense undergrowth, but every step felt like a descent into hell. Their numbers dwindled further. One man collapsed from exhaustion and refused to rise. They begged, pleaded, pulled at his arms, but he only stared at the canopy above and whispered, "Better the sky than the beast." He closed his eyes. By nightfall, his body was gone, dragged off silently, leaving only a smear of blood in the mud. The officer, once a figure of control and authority, now looked just as broken as the rest. His uniform was shredded, his face gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. His orders grew frantic, his words sharp, his temper explosive. "Keep moving," he barked, though his own legs shook with weakness. "If we stop, we die. If we stop, it will take us." But the truth was clear. Stopping or moving both meant the same. The jungle itself seemed to twist against them. Paths that should have led out only circled back. Rivers they tried to follow forked into swamps that swallowed their boots whole. It was as if the beast not only hunted them, but guided them deeper, leading them exactly where it wanted. By the sixth day, there were barely a handful left. At dusk, they stumbled into a small clearing. Their bodies screamed for rest. Their minds begged for sleep. And though every instinct warned against it, exhaustion won. They collapsed, forming a loose circle with rifles clutched in trembling hands. For a while, silence hung over them. The jungle whispered, but no attack came. A few men dared to close their eyes. Then it struck, not from the shadows this time, not with slow, creeping menace, but with an explosion of fury. The beast tore into the clearing, a blur of claws and teeth. It moved faster than thought, faster than eyes could follow. One man's head was crushed in a single swipe. Another was lifted and hurled against a tree, his bones shattering like dry twigs. Blood sprayed across the leaves, across the fire, across the faces of the survivors. They fired wildly, bullets tearing into the darkness, but it was useless. The thing moved like smoke, like a shadow given flesh. Every shot missed or sank harmlessly into its hide. The clearing became a slaughterhouse. When it was done, only 3 men remained, bloody, trembling, clinging to each other like drowning sailors clinging to driftwood. The beast stood just beyond the fire, its chest heaving, its claws dripping. Its eyes glowed brighter than ever, reflecting the flames. It didn't strike again, not yet. Instead, it lowered itself to the ground and stared, watching, studying, almost as if it wanted them to know, "You cannot escape, you cannot fight, you are mine." The survivors broke down completely. One sobbed uncontrollably, his body shaking. Another prayed aloud, words tumbling over themselves in desperation. The officer stared in silence, lips pressed tight, blood trickling from a wound on his temple. They knew the truth now. This wasn't a hunt anymore. It was a slow death sentence. The beast would not kill them quickly. It would break them first. The jungle was quiet, too quiet. The last 3 survivors sat huddled around the dying fire, their bodies broken, their minds frayed, every muscle ached. Their skin was shredded from thorns, their uniforms little more than rags, soaked with sweat, blood, and mud. The air stank of rot, of fear, of something worse. The metallic tang of death that clung to their nostrils and would not leave. They hadn't spoken in hours. There was nothing left to say. The officer clutched his rifle, though his eyes were vacant, his mind teetering on the edge of collapse. The soldier who had prayed now whispered the same line over and over, his words slurred as if in a trance. "Kami-sama, save me. Kami-sama, save me." The third man, little more than a boy, rocked back and forth, hugging his knees, his face pale, his eyes staring into nothing. The fire crackled weakly. The shadows stretched. And then, as if the jungle itself had taken a breath, they heard it. That sound. That low, guttural rumble that was not quite a growl, not quite a roar. Something inhuman, something ancient, something that froze their blood before the beast even showed itself. The soldier praying began to scream. He screamed for his mother, for his God, for anyone. The boy scrambled to his feet and pointed wildly into the trees, shouting words that tumbled over themselves in panic. The officer stood slowly, raising his rifle, though his arms trembled uncontrollably. Then it stepped into the clearing. The firelight revealed its shape at last, and the sight was worse than anything they had imagined. It wasn't just a predator, it was something that shouldn't exist. Taller than any man, its shoulders broad, its limbs too long, its skin stretched taut over muscle that looked carved from stone. Its eyes glowed like coals pulled from the heart of a furnace. Its mouth split into a grin far too wide, filled with jagged teeth slick with fresh blood, and its claws, curved black, glistening, dripped with what was left of their comrades. The men froze. The officer whispered, "Hold your ground." His voice cracked, more plea than command. The boy fired first, his rifle spitting fire into the night. The bullets struck the beast's chest, thudding, useless. The creature didn't flinch. It didn't bleed. Instead, it advanced, each step shaking the ground, each movement deliberate, savoring their terror. The boy's screams merged with the sound of his gun. Then the beast lunged. It was too fast, too powerful. Its claw swept through the air like a scythe, and the boy's body crumpled, torn apart before he could finish his last cry. His rifle clattered to the ground, useless. The soldier who had prayed collapsed to his knees. He dropped his weapon and pressed his forehead to the dirt, sobbing, pleading, "Kami-sama, take me." Donset led it. The beast obliged. A single strike silenced him, leaving nothing but a broken body in the mud. Now only the officer remained. He stood shaking, his rifle raised, his finger frozen on the trigger. His chest heaved, his lips quivered, but his eyes held something different, not courage but defiance born of despair. "You won't take me like the others," he muttered. His voice was hollow but steady. The beast stopped. For a moment it simply stared at him, its head tilted, its grin widening, as if mocking him. The officer fired. One shot, then another, then another. Each bullet tore into the creature's chest, but it didn't falter. It only stepped closer, the firelight reflecting in its eyes, in its teeth. Click. The rifle was empty. The officer dropped it. He reached into his coat and pulled free the last weapon he had, a single grenade. His thumb trembled over the pin, sweat streaming down his face. "You still take me," he whispered, "but I still take you with me." For the first time, the beast hesitated. Its eyes narrowed, its growl deepened. The officer yanked the pin. The explosion tore through the clearing. A blinding flash of light, a thunderous roar that shook the jungle. Flames consumed the trees. Smoke billowed into the air. The ground shook, birds shrieked into the sky. Then silence. When the smoke cleared, the jungle was scarred. The fire smoldered, leaves and branches burned to ash. Of the officer, nothing remained but blood and fragments. And yet, from the smoke, two glowing eyes blinked open. The beast stood amidst the ruin, scarred but alive, its grin unchanged. It let out a low, rumbling laugh that echoed through the forest, a sound that carried far, far into the night. The jungle swallowed the noise as it had swallowed the men. And just like that, the soldiers of that doomed patrol were gone, vanished. Their blood, their bones, their screams, all claimed by the beast. The war would end, battles would be won and lost, nations would rise and fall, but in that stretch of jungle, something still prowled, something older than war, something hungrier than time. And to this day, locals whisper of it. The man-eater who waits. The monster who tasted human fear and never let it go. The one that ensures the jungle will always run red with blood.